I have been unlucky. Unlike Warren and Ken, I didn't really know Peter Drucker. I only met him twice in my life, but I have a huge shelf of his books. Unfortunately, he came into my life rather late. It was an odd thing, but when I went to business school in America in the 1960s, the name of Drucker was never mentioned. And when I went back to help to run bits of the business school in London, the name of Drucker was never mentioned. Interesting. I think the reason is that Drucker is worshipped by those who live in the real world and is slightly dangerous for those who live in the academic towers, except, of course, in Claremont. But eventually, I discovered his books, and eventually I started to read with growing irritation because all the words and ideas that I had been carefully composing in my own books, bugger me if you say the language, Peter had got there before, as Ken also discovered. It got worse. 4 years ago, I produced one of my more interesting books, I thought, and I came up with a wonderful title for it called The Elephant and the Flea. Oh dear. I discovered after it was published that Peter had used exactly the same metaphor in 1962. Damn him. Then, some years ago, well, about 12 years ago, disliking words like consultant and guru or charlatan, I decided to call myself a social philosopher. And then I discovered that Peter had also called himself a social ecologist. Honestly, that man. And you know, it's happened to me again this morning. All the things that I was going to say, they've just been said by those two giants of the field, Warren and Ken. So you'll just have to hear the same message again with an English accent. But eventually, I got to meet the man, and then I last saw him, well, 9 years ago in this city at a festschrift for Warren Bennis. And by then I had forgiven him for stealing all my best ideas before I'd actually had them. And Elizabeth took this photograph, and you can see here I am paying homage to the master as he is actually telling me some wise, interesting thing and mocking something or other that I had probably said. But he was indeed, and still is, an enormous influence on my life. And I wanted to share with you 3 things that I think are terribly important, which actually coincide with 3 things that I hope he thinks were terribly important, and which I think matter not only to leaders, but to anyone who's any pretension to trying to influence other people. For instance, a parent. For instance, a teacher. For instance, well, anybody. The first of this starts with an encounter that I'm told somebody had with Peter, not me. Apparently, I am told they asked Peter how he learned. And Peter said, I learn, he said, by listening, long pause, to myself. And first of all, you think, what an egotistical old man he is. But actually, of course, he was being very wise. He was putting into his own words that Irish saying, how do I know what I think until I hear what I say? And when you reflect on it, that's how you learn. You learn by working out and being forced to either write or to speak the kinds of things that you have. have an argument with a friend, and you'll be surprised how wise you are at the words that come out of your mouth. As Peter said, he learns, and Ken told you, and Warren, he learns nothing from books, from reading books, that is, only from writing them. And I found exactly the same myself. So recently, I pulled myself together at the request of my publishers and wrote my memoir, which is over there. Forgive this shameless piece of self-advertisement, but it was a very interesting exercise, even though my American publishers said, surely you've got the title wrong. It should be Myself and More Important Matters. Myself and Other Important Matters, not more. But that's the British way of putting things. I found it a most interesting exercise because I had to trot through my own life and work not remind myself what I'd done or what had happened to me, but also why and what I'd learned from it. I do commend to you that at some stage in your life, you write the story of your life, even if you only do it for your children or your grandchildren, because you will learn an enormous amount from it. You learn by writing, and you learn by talking. All the statistics show that when you leave this room at 12:30 this morning, you will only remember 18% of what I have said to you. And by the time you get to bed tonight, you will only recall 5%. Probably one of the two pictures I'm going to show you, and one or two of the stories, so you'll forget the point of the story. And by the end of the week, you will just remember one idea, if I'm lucky. I, on the other hand, will remember every single word that I have said, because I have learnt it by heart before I came to meet you. So I will learn much more than you from this morning. Interesting, because if that applies to me, it applies to you. And therefore it also applies, for instance, to my students. In other words, if they do the talking and the teaching, they will learn more than myself, who will listen to them. So by the time I had resolved this in my teaching career at the London Business School, in my last 2 years, I gave no lectures. I spoke not at all in the class, except at the very beginning, when I would assign to various groups of the students certain inquiries, pieces of active research out there in the world, saying to them, for instance, go and investigate in different organizations, and I will list you 5 potential ones, what actually motivates people, and why is it different in a hospital or in a bank? Or what organizational structure produces most creativity? Go look. And come back towards the end of the semester and teach the rest of the class what you have learnt. Oh, and right at the end, each of you write me an individual 3,000-word essay saying what you have learnt and how it is going to change your life. And all that I did was sit in the back of the class and ask rude questions from time to time. The rest of the faculty did not appreciate what I was doing. And indeed, the Japanese students asked for their money back. But I have to tell you, most people learnt a lot. I mean, the rest of the faculty said, well, what on earth is my job if I'm not here to pontificate and tell them what I'm doing? And the students were not in the class. They were outside in the real world. Unheard of. We want them there, sitting, listening at my feet. So it was never imitated, but it still worked. I said to an ex-student of mine who ended up as chairman of one of the biggest oil companies in the world, and I said to him, John, what do you do all day, sitting up there at the top of this enormous tower? And he said, well, Charles, it doesn't sound very exciting. But actually what I do is I sit in a chair up there or around the world where we operate, sometimes with one or two of my colleagues, sometimes by myself, and I listen to endless people presenting me with proposals, ideas, presentations, analyses, and so on, and all I do is to ask questions. And he said, it doesn't sound exciting, but I think it's the right thing to do. My job is to ask the questions. Theirs is to answer them, because that's the only way they're actually going to do anything about my questions, if they compose the answers, not me. Listening, not only to yourself, but to others, is absolutely essential. Don't tell your children what to do. Ask them what they want to do and get them to lecture you. Then they will learn. But you've got to pay attention. Pay attention. I asked a distinguished theatrical director in London what the secret of acting was. And he thought for a moment and he said, paying attention. Paying attention to the other actors on stage. Paying attention to the words that were written that he had learned or she had learned. Paying attention. And I think that all great leaders, and apart from respect, which is part of it, learn to listen, to pay attention, and get other people to do the talking to them. And it's so tempting, isn't it, to do what I'm doing now, to stand up on a platform in front of all the troops and pontificate. So why am I doing this? Because I wanted to learn what impact Peter Drucker had had on me. And the only way to do that was to persuade the Drucker Institute to invite me to come and talk to you so that I could learn. So thank you very much for you doing the listening so that I can actually learn by talking to you. That's the whole reason for the existence. So that's the first thing that I hope that Peter and I share, which is a necessity for leaders and indeed for anybody in position of responsibility to listen to themselves as they talk and as they write, and to find excuses to do that, precisely. And the second one is very much the sort of stuff that Ken was talking about. What, in the words of Peter Drucker, for, or what is the purpose of your business? What is a business for? And while I was considering that at the start of this year, I tumbled on this book, which is a fascinating history of American management. Of course, damn it. As I read it, I realized that actually it had been inspired and instigated and encouraged by Peter Drucker, who actually broke his own rule and gave a public endorsement on the back of it. It's a wonderful book. And I'm excited and delighted and surprised to know that one of the authors, William Hopper, because it's written by two brothers, is here today, which I had not expected and had not known. And I'm so thrilled because it is a wonderful book. It is a history of American management, produced by these two brothers, Hopper, who one lives in London and one lives in New York. And they've been working on it for many years at the encouragement of Peter Drucker. But it's also a sort of lament for the passing of the great American management culture, which they say was inherited from the Puritans of long ago, which basically said that a business should be a community with a purpose to improve and add wealth and benefit to society, a community in which individuals would be prepared to subordinate their own needs to the greater good of the company and of society, one which had a well-demarked chain of responsibilities and accountabilities, one in which if you wanted to keep your customers, you had to continuously innovate, rely on creativity and constant improvement and high quality. That way you would be successful. That way you would get more customers. And that way, in due course, you would get your reward, as Ken says, which would be profit, which could be used to sustain the business and to give a proper dividend to your investors and your shareholders. That way round. The purpose of the business was to add value to your customers and to your societies. And it created 50 years, as they point out, from 1920 to 1970, of the great American prosperity and the giant engine companies that built that. And then in the Japanese occupation, they took that message, partly with the help of Peter Drucker, to Japan and built the Japanese medical in the 1940s and the 1950s. And then in the 1960s in this country, and indeed in mine, things started to go wrong. And the number crunchers, the financial engineers, the so-called professionals came in. And as you all know, they made profit the goal, no matter how you might achieve it. And in my view, not only did they mistake the purpose of the company, they created and I speak as a philosopher really, they made a category mistake. They took what was a measure and made it a goal. And when you do that, you may lose sight of what you were there for. We in Britain have lived under a government for the last 10 years which was obsessed with setting targets for everything under their control. So, for instance, they said, we will have a league table of all the state schools, and we will rank them in terms of their examination successes. So what did the schools do? They coached and they trained their students to pass the exams, exclusively, in spite of their own basic inclinations that the purpose of education was to create a full individual and a good citizen. They had to concentrate their enemies in order to move up the league table on passing those wretched exams. Initially, they said to hospitals, we will measure you on your throughput of patients. The more patients you can handle and turn out, the more efficient you will be, and we will reward you. Well, of course, what did the hospitals do? They didn't want anybody with long-term illnesses, terminal complaints and so on. They said, go home and die. We can't afford to look after you because it'll rank us down the level. If you have targets as the goal, you will forget what you are there for. They said to the police, we will count the number of arrests and we will promote you and put you up the league table if more arrests you have. So what the police do, they went around arresting teenagers for dropping litter and all sorts of stuff and filling in forms, and crime went up. If you give people targets, which should be measures, and turn them into a goal, you forget what you are doing, what you are there to do. And so it was, I think, with many businesses. They forgot what they were there to do. The great Puritan gift of concentrating on adding value to your customers and to society was a category mistake by the financial engineers, too many of whom, I'm afraid, were products of the business schools of your land and my land. And this book records it with lovely stories and wonderful anecdotes. And though the Hopper brothers say they see some future that may be better and some signs of goodness, of rediscovering that sense of community with a purpose. I mean, you look at Apple, you can't deny that they are thinking of ways to delight their customers. Of Google, who is managing to create a new world in a way and finding other people to pay for it other than the customers, quite fantastic. You look at Pixar and the way that they actually managed to persuade children to rejoice in the antics of old men and so on. I mean, there are wonderful things that are happening in this country. And maybe they, too, will be a gift that you will give to the world. But there are too few of them, I fear. However, it's interesting. I was encouraged the other day when the head of our financial regulation body in Britain castigated the banks because so many of their activities, he said, were socially useless. the banks were indignant, of course, and said, we pay all these taxes. And there was a row. But the interesting thing is that nobody thought to challenge the premise that business should be socially useful. Without thinking about it, we seem to have accepted that business should be socially useful to the world and not just to the people who work in it. St. Augustine said of individuals that those who are turned in on themselves and concerned only with themselves are morally bankrupt and doomed. An organization also falls into St. Augustine's condemnation. If they are turned in on themselves and working only for themselves, they are morally doomed and will die eventually. So, read this book and ponder. And the third thing that I'm concerned with, and with Peter is also, I think, very good at, is looking underneath the stairs. Ponder this piece of art. Yes, it is a piece of art. It is a sculpture by one of Britain's great sculptresses, Rachel Whiteread. It had pride of place in the British Pavilion of the Venice Biennale 2 years ago. So it's a worthy thing. Now, what Rachel does is she makes the unseen visible. So if she were to come into your house, and she might decide to take your bed and fill the space beneath your bed with some kind of composite or plastic, and then remove the bed, and you'd have this block of plastic. And she would say that represents the space you don't even think about that's there underneath your bed. Odd, not very beautiful, but thought-provoking. I keep this picture on my desk. What it is, forget the fact that it's located in a rather strange sort of gallery, it looks like a church. It is the underneath of a staircase. Imagine clothing that in wood. The stairs, and underneath the stairs, at the back, a sort of cupboard. And it would look perfectly ordinary, a wooden staircase. But what she's done, of course, is she's filled the space underneath the stairs and above the cupboard and with this sort of things that look like concrete, but it's lighter than that because it's moved around. And then she's removed all the, the wood. And you're left with the space you never notice, the space beneath the stairs. Now, what Peter was quite good at was looking at the space beneath the stairs, looking at the things that are going on in the world at the moment, which might be significant in the days to come, which I think is what leaders have to do everywhere. To prepare for the future, they have to look beneath the stairs. And that's indeed what I also try to do in my books. I mean, Peter came up with the idea of knowledge workers, never quite sure what they are. People who do finances, I suppose, people who draw drawings or whatever, but presumably others. I mean, I do urge you actually to go and look at the photographs by Irving Penn at the Getty Center, where he has photographed all the tradespeople in the 1950s in Paris, London, and New York. And these people he invited to their studios carrying the tools of their trade, a knife grinder, a rag and bone man. I mean, things that don't exist anymore, a fireman, and they look magnificent, standing there, proud of what they do. And in a sense, in their own world, they were knowledge workers. But anyway, he said the future belongs to the knowledge workers, and I think he's right, whatever they are. And so in a sense, he was looking underneath the stairs some years ago now, and of course it's coming true. Peter, I believe, always said that he was no futurist, partly because he, in 1929, predicted a great boom, and it turned out to be a great depression, but also because by the time his predictions, if they were predictions, or the things he saw underneath the stairs came to fruition, it was about 20 years, and everybody had forgotten he said them, which I found the same with me, actually. It's rather annoying to find the government now taking notice in Britain of things that I said 20 years ago, and they don't even know that I said them. As somebody said of me, you know, by the time he finds out he's wrong, he'll be dead. But nevertheless, leaders should look underneath the stairs, as Peter did so well. And so I thought that I should also take a look underneath the stairs and think about the kinds of things that are happening now, which are going to be increasingly important in the morning, in the day after tomorrow, in the years ahead. And I won't linger on them long, because it would take ages to explore them. And the first is growth. I think we will have to start, and are starting, to redefine growth. We all need growth. Otherwise, there seems little point in life. But why did we always assume that growth means more? That growth somehow is never ending? That the world, rather like the universe, our world can continually expand. Apart from the universe, there is nothing in nature that has unchecked growth, apart from a cancer cell. And even that ultimately destroys its host body. Nothing grows forever. Why, therefore, do we actually think that our business will grow forever, or our wealth will grow forever as a nation, that GNP will continue to rise everywhere? It can't happen. Maybe consumerism is the new cancer of society. Look, last year, I sat stationary for 1 hour in a 12-lane traffic jam in Beijing, while my host was telling me of the aspirations of the Chinese people. He said, in China, we have 8 cars per 1,000 people. Why should we not be like America, where they have 500 cars per 1,000 people? And I said, looking around the 12 lanes of traffic, stationary, where will you put them? Where will you put them? And are there enough resources in the world to build them? And what will you run them on? And I'm not just taking China. It's the same with America. It's the same with Britain. It can't go on. Yes, it can, actually, but we'll have to change. Either they'll have to find a new way of personal transport in Beijing, and then they'll go back to bicycles, or technology will have to come to our rescue and devise, as they may well do, new forms of personal transport, relying on fuel cells, hydrogen, electricity. Maybe they'll be made out of fiber. Who knows? Technology has in the past solved our problems. So the growth will not be more of, but will be different. And there is a lot of money to be made in difference as opposed to more. In fact, if you really wait to make money, as you know, in a competitive market, be different, not more of the same, because that's where competitors already are. Go where there are no competitors, be different. Similarly, in our organizations, can they grow inexorably? Or will they actually end up like what Peter called collections of tents around the place? People in America are occasionally rather critical of our national health system. We think it's wonderful. Medical care at the point of delivery for free to everybody, unconditional, even to American citizens like Warren Bennis. But sometimes it doesn't work very well. But the reason is not that the principle is wrong. The reason is the National Health Service is the third largest employer in the world after the Indian Railways and the Chinese Army. It has 1.25 million people on its payroll. It is unmanageable. and they've really got to change the way they run it. If they listened to me, they would find out how to do it, but they don't, because they think they can run it from the center. But as Kofi Annan said at the United Nations celebrating the start of the new century, he said, if we've learned one thing in the last 50 years, is that running things from the center doesn't work. Unfortunately, they haven't spoken to the British government. But organizations cannot grow exponentially in the same form. They will have to be different. What difference will that be? And similarly in our own lives. Does more got to mean, does growth got to mean more money, more cars, more possessions? Or could it be different? And I think that more and more people are struggling with a way of finding to grow different, to grow better, to go broader, to grow deeper, rather than to go bigger. And that remains, I think, the new challenge, basically, for leaders of all organizations. And the second thing that I just want to touch on is the new need and demand, I think, for I would call respectable individualism or proper selfishness. People more and more want to be in control of their own lives. They do not want to be your passive human resources to be sent hither and thither to do what they are told to do. More and more people are finding organizations are prisons for the human soul. 24 employees of France Telecom last year committed suicide for work reasons. I can't stand this reorganization, one of them wrote to her father. Another person stabbed himself in the middle of a meeting. Don't say that this is just Frenchmen getting crazy. It's beginning to happen in this country too. The number of people who said that they were committed to their organization fell from 92% in this country last year to 39%. And in Britain, 18% of our members of a survey said that they would be prepared to sabotage their organization. There is unhappiness at large in our places of work, partly because people want to be individuals and recognized as such, and if not, they can't get from their organization, they will move out. It is the dream of every MBA student to run their own business and to be independent. More and more of them are opting for what I've called the portfolio life. But if you do that, you have a challenge. You have to be sure that you know who you are and what your values are if you're responsible for your own life. You can't blame anybody else but you. And do you know who you are? I start this memoir of my life by telling the story of being a present at one of my wife's, who's a photographer, one of her exhibitions down in southern England. And I was wandering around backstage, as it were, while she was taking the place of glory and honor, as is only appropriate. And somebody came up to me and he said, wonderful pictures, aren't they? And I said, they are indeed. And he said, they tell me that Charles Handy is here as well as his wife Elizabeth. Is that true, do you know? And I said, indeed it is true, and I am he, said I, say, appropriately modestly. And he looked at me up and down for a long moment, and then he said, are you sure? And it's a good question, because we are all more than one person. We are all more than one person. This is my wife's self-portrait. There are 3 women in that room. They are all Elizabeth. And she does this quite often. She calls them a joiner. She asks you to illustrate yourself in 3 of your principal roles in life and to place them in the same room. And then she'd take a series of photographs of you, and then she'd piece them all together. And what happens is that the one that seems to you intuitively to be your most important role, you'll place nearest the camera so it'll be larger. So this is Elizabeth in the front, a professional photographer. That's what she really is. But she has family responsibilities. She's the home manager there in the middle. And at the back, there she is as my business partner and manager. You can see how terribly important I am in her life. Now, it's very interesting. If you were To have Elizabeth in your house and she were to say to you, what are your 3 roles and where would you place yourself in them in the room? What would be in the front? And would it be the bit that you earn money by? Or is that just a basic thing? And for instance, this chap, John McLaren, we photographed, and he was at the time a banker, but he chose to put himself in the banking role in his dark suit at the back of the room. Clearly not very important, though that was how he earned his living at the time. And he was a very competent amateur musician, and there he is. But much to our surprise, he put in the front of it his ambition to be a novelist. And he's already written 2 books there in the front. And since that was taken, he has abandoned the bank, and he is now a full-time novelist and filmmaker of his own books. And so in a sense, by making this picture, he discovered who he really was and what his priorities really were. So don't pretend to yourself. Don't pretend to yourself if you're going to take charge of your own life. And if you're going to be running any other thing as a leader, make sure that you don't pretend to your people. Be real. And do remember that everybody has more than one side to their life, and if you're employing them, you must give room for them. You must give room for them to explore their other selves. And finally, Elizabeth has another device. She asks people to compose a personal still life, which will actually illustrate the things that are really important to them. She was wandering around a gallery in London not so long ago, looking at these 16th and 15th century Dutch portraits of still lives where people put together objects which represented their status in life. You know, they were rich, so there were bits of coins or possessions, or they loved nature, so there were bits of grapes or whatever. And she thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we did a modern version of this and we composed a personal still life? That's mine. This is me. 5 objects and a flower or a piece of foliage to represent what is important to you in your life. It's interesting exercise for you to do. The first 3 things you will find very easy. For instance, that's Elizabeth, camera lens, and that's olive oil because I love cooking. But what matters is what goes into the center. And you fiddle around with them, and it's interesting what you come up with. And just to end with, I'll explain what's in the center there for me, because it, again, in the end, is a part about my theory of leadership. Right in the center is a gift from my 2 children of a sculpture that they commissioned of a piece of gum tree on top of a hard rock. And they said, that represents us, your 2 golden seeds. And yes, indeed, my children are my ultimate legacy to this world when I die. They'll outlive my books and any films that might have been made of me pontificating on platforms. So that's my ultimate legacy. But also that refers to my theory of golden seeds, that the greatest gift you can give anybody as a respected elder, even if you're not that old, someone in authority, is to give them a degree of self-belief, to tell them that they are wonderfully good at something that they half suspected but didn't know, or better still, to take a risk with them. The dean of the London Business School, when I went there, after 3 years, made me a full professor before I had written an article or the page of a book. As he said to me, I need you with the stature of a professorship. You will have to earn it after you've got it. He took one hell of a risk with the university authorities, a hell of a risk with me. It changed my life. I shall always be grateful. Can you, as a leader, take a risk with somebody? Can you give them that sense of self-belief? It is the greatest gift you can give anybody. And that's my theory of education, my theory of leadership. And finally, there's a little white stone there perched against the elephant. And that's from the verse in the book of Revelations in the Bible, which says, the one who succeeds, the angel says, I will give a white stone, on which shall be written a name that will be known only to the one who receives it. Mysterious. I think it means that if I fulfill myself, live up to my potential, I will deserve my name. Until then, I'm a charade. And so I keep the white stone and that little sculpture on my desk, along with the empty staircase, just to remind me of what I'm trying to do in life. So thank you very much. I let Rick explain.
Again, please welcome Rick Wartsman, Executive Director of the Drucker Institute.
Charles, thank you so much. It's always so delightful to hear you. I hope you learned a lot. I think we learned a lot ourselves in this case. We have just a few minutes left this morning, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about the financial crisis that we've come through. And it was brought on by so many things that we sort of heard the counter story to this morning from all three of our speakers. This was a crisis brought on by recklessness and greed and this incredible short-term-itis, this managerial myopia. Do you think we've learned our lesson? And was this really a watershed, or are we as human beings going to forget all about this before long and go back to our old ways?
I really hoped it would be a big crisis and that we would actually learn something from it. Well, I don't really know what's happening in this country, but in Britain, no, they're back to their ways. The banks are... Already. The bonuses this year are bigger than ever, and there seems to be no contrition, no sense of responsibility amongst the people there. And it's not just the banks. I mean, the bonus culture has exploded in our country, and it has turned what you might call a proper selfishness into greed, actually. And no, we haven't learned, because in a funny way, the crisis wasn't severe enough. I mean, and you're almost out of it, I suspect, in the beginning of it. At least that's the impression. We talk about the three economies, love, we call it LUV. We think that the British economy is in an L-shaped state. It's gone down and is plumping along the bottom.
Right.
But it's gone down, so it's leveled out. The American economy is a U. They're already going up.
Right.
And the Eastern economies are a V. They break down and they're shooting up. So the crisis is, in a sense, I'm afraid, not severe enough for us to change anything.
We've squandered this crisis.
Yeah, we let it go to waste.
Huh. Is there something that needs to happen culturally? Is there something, I mean, what kind of forces can turn things around, can get back to the kind of Puritan gift corporate culture that did exist? I mean, the book that the Hoppers wrote, this isn't some just idealistic notion. This is how, at least by and large, American management at big companies ran themselves for a long time, for 50 years. What has to get us back there?
Well, good examples, really. I mean, there are some. I mean, I think that there and there are, inspired leaders, and Ken was talking about some of them, and I think creating a mood. I think one of the problems is that governments can't lead; they have to follow, because in a democracy, they must carry most of the people with them. And so it is the responsibility of people like you and me, people who stand on the outside, in a sense, to set the mood. People couldn't outlaw smoking in our country until everybody felt it was the right thing to do, even if they didn't like it. But There was a general consensus around. So we need to create a mood, and that's why what you are doing at Drucker is so terribly important, and why spreading the kind of Drucker stuff around the world is so incredibly important. And we shouldn't worship the man. We should adopt his ideas and build on them. And that's his legacy would be, I think, a new culture in the corporations of the world. It'll take time. These things don't happen overnight. But it will happen. I sense with the young a feeling that, you know, the world could be more idealistic. And they'd like organizations that shared that kind of dream to be around, that they could join. And so maybe.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I know that one of the many things that I admire about you and Liz, and I know this, that wherever you are in the world, whenever you travel very extensively, you know, you're far more interested and always make a point of meeting with young people, with the next generation, if you will, as opposed to meeting with quote-unquote important people, that you're much more interested in meeting those coming up and hearing what's on their mind. And we do hear a lot about the idealism of the next generation, this we generation. Do you think it's for real, and is it a powerful enough force to maybe give us some real hope?
Well, you never know. I mean, we love the young people because they're the people under the stairs, you know. I mean, they're the future. And we just hope they don't get corrupted as they get on family responsibilities and need more money and all the rest of it. But, you know, in China we met with some sort of 28-year-olds, and they were very idealistic. And we've recently been in Sweden at a huge gathering called the Talberg Forum of the social entrepreneurs, talking about what consumerism is doing to the world and the problems of climate change and all the rest of it. And they were very, very positive about wanting to make a contribution. So yeah, I'm okay. They're a small group really, but it's there, and I'm hopeful. And we just need to make it fashionable and respectable.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you again for your part in doing just that.